During the boom years, there was a nationwide epidemic of borrowing and spending in America. We collectively demonstrated our willingness to live well beyond our means.
You know, Americans were on a spending binge and their savings was about zero, and they were borrowing all kinds of money, running things up on credit cards and using their houses as piggy banks. You know, that's one of the things that fueled the boom, was that when your house went up in value, you said, well, gee, now I can extract some of that value out of it and buy myself a new car or buy a vacation home or something like that.
The economy has become sustained by this consumer spending, and the consumer spending has been sustained by people taking equity out of their homes. So what you've done is made this country much more of a debt spending, I don't know if that's a real phrase, but a debt spending nation, right? Where large percentages of the American people took money out of their houses and just spent it, right? They weren't investing it per se, they were spending it.
Mortgage equity withdrawals have grown considerably since the 1990s. In 2005, homeowners extracted $750 billion of equity from their homes, 2/3 of which went towards personal consumption, home improvements, and credit card debt. Financial irresponsibility became the status quo.
If you take somebody over the last 4 or 5 years and they're into this cycle of what people have been doing, you know, use one credit card to pay for your other card, you overextend yourself, businesses overextend itself, but you have some underlying bubble that's reaffirming that this behavior isn't crazy. Look around, everybody, you know, is taking vacations, everybody's buying cars. I'm not engaging in any of this, you know, and it's all working out for everybody for a while. So in that kind of setting, you got to be a fool not to join in. I just think a lot of it sets a norm. There's just a norm of behavior that gets established, and you either join it or you sit on the outside.
In 2002, the total credit debt in the United States was $660 billion. By the end of 2007, it had risen to $2.5 trillion. This is an average of $8,400 of credit card debt per household. According to the Federal Reserve, 40% of American households spend more than they earn. This trend was definitely influenced by the herd mentality. The fact is that so many people were living beyond their means because it was socially acceptable. But there was another psychological force playing into this as well, one that stems from our need to compare ourselves with others.
People care about not just their absolute level of consumption, but they care about how well they're doing relative to everyone else. So this is just keeping up with the Joneses. And so if my neighbor's buying a new plasma TV and a Humvee, if they can afford to live in this neighborhood and they can afford the plasma TV and the Humvee, then I can probably afford it too. And the problem is that we see what our neighbors are consuming, but we don't see their whole balance sheet. We don't see their income, we don't see their debt, and we get caught up in thinking, you know, if they have it, I'm entitled to have it as well.
With the rise of consumerism in the United States and the increasing availability of goods, Americans became more inclined to define themselves through ownership. This behavior of conspicuous consumption has created a social hierarchy based on material possessions. In other words, the degree to which we deem ourselves as successes or failures is often measured by what we have in comparison to our peers.
We have this consumption attitude in the United States. I mean, we just want to consume and want to consume, and we want we want the fastest cars, and we want the biggest houses, and we want the freshest clothes, and it's like everywhere. You know, I heard a new Mercedes ad the other day. It's, you know, be the envy of all your friends, and that's what I mean. That's what we are as Americans.
Similar social forces also played a role in inflating house prices. Our willingness to incur debt created an environment where people purchased homes using mortgages that might have once been viewed unrealistic or beyond their means. Because we could pay more, we did, and because we did, house prices became increasingly inflated.
In the case of bidding for a house, what's your goal? You want to buy a house in a good school district. Because of these relaxed credit terms, people were able to bid more for houses. Other people did that. If you didn't, then your kids were the ones that end up going to the bad schools, and most people weren't willing to sit by and accept that outcome, so they borrowed and invested in more expensive houses too. The rub is that when everyone does that, you don't get the outcome you'd hoped for. You just bid up the prices in the good school districts.
One interesting aspect of herd behavior is that the herd is not completely interested in the protection of the group. Instead, self-interest is the primary motivator. Herd animals, when they fear a predator, compete to get into the center of their herd so they are less vulnerable. People seem to behave similarly. Throughout the housing boom, many people were acting in their own self-interest. Ironically, this synchronized selfishness had a profound negative effect on society as a whole. In the case of the unregulated subprime mortgage industry, mortgage firms were compelled to have a race to the bottom, perpetually diminishing the quality of mortgage products. The rationale was that if one firm didn't keep up with the competition's lax lending practices, it would go out of business.
There was pressure between our individual companies. Everybody wanted to have a niche product, something that somebody else didn't have. And when you found that niche, I mean, you just sold it and sold it and sold it. So the pressure was when Argent only went to 95 and New Century had 100, well, Argent said they were losing market share. So they said, well, we need to do 100. So they did 100. And then, you know, one company drops their FICO score to 600. So, you know, we would follow suit and we drop ours to 600. And, you know, it just kept spiraling and spiraling. So there was a pressure to compete within our industry, and that, you know, fueled, probably some bad decisions to do some loans that we probably shouldn't have done.
More and more irresponsible mortgage products were created, increasing the risk for borrowers.
One thing we covered early on was the risk in these loans called payment option arms. And this is a loan where the consumer is given, you know, 4 payment plans a month. Okay, they get their little coupon book. And one is to pay it like a normal 30-year loan, pay it like a 15-year loan, pay it like an interest-only loan where you're not paying off any principal. And the other is the killer, called the negative AM option, negative amortization, where you get to keep your monthly payment low by actually adding on to your debt. I wrote a column about this back a couple of years ago, and I thought, this is insane. Why are you giving people the opportunity to make their debt even bigger?
The race to the bottom was encouraged and exacerbated by the accepted compensation structure in the mortgage lending industry. Mortgage brokers generated fees for each mortgage they issued. They had no stock in whether the borrower could actually repay the loan, and so their only motivation was to issue as many loans as possible, regardless of the borrower's financial situation or credit score.
You have the incentives all wrong. Instead of the people who are making the loans having to bear any financial risk in the event the loans are not repaid, they are playing basically an adult game of hot potato. I get the potato, I get paid for having the potato, and as long as I can toss it to the next person before anything happens, I'm in cash. I'm in good shape. I got money. You're paying the mortgage brokers and the banks a commission for originating these loans. They have every incentive to lend money to everybody who comes in the door, which is part of why we're seeing lesser criteria. You know, oh, no, you don't have to bring in your tax returns. You don't have to bring in your W-2. Yeah, it's okay that you're going to borrow 98% of the house. It's a booming market. We're sure the housing market, you know, is going to go, up. You know, everything will be fine. Well, part of why I feel everything will be fine is, frankly, I've totally laid the risk off on someone else.
It's sort of interesting and surprising, and I think an object lesson in some ways, that type of really antisocial behavior has just had a huge cost for society as a whole. So what do I mean by antisocial? I mean, because in this case, this antisocial means selling people products that are clearly not well suited to them, persuading people to take risks that no objective advisor would suggest that they take, putting people in a financial situation they clearly cannot deal with. You know, if you have a third party at arm's length look at these transactions and say, is that a reasonable thing for this broker to sell that consumer? The third party would always say no. But to go ahead and sell in spite of that, I think is unreasonable. It's irresponsible. Now, you know, it's good for cash flow in the short run. So, I mean, there's a clear conflict there for these mortgage brokers between what's in their own personal interest and what's good for their clients and what's good for society as a whole.